Seated. So I went to the Shabbat service. Bring it down a little bit. I went to a Shabbat service yesterday. Come on. I didn't say stop clapping. They were clapping for Shabbat. And one time I went to a black church and they were clapping for Jesus. And I thought, can you use clap for love? Come on, clap. Well, let's go. Keep clapping. You're going to be clapping for a while. I know it's a little hokey, but it's kind of fun. I realized this sermon about Philia, traditionally brotherly love, was really about the commandment to love one another and how difficult it is to love one another, even when we don't even like one another. The divisions in our lives, the isolation, are real, right? I was watching the State of the Union, and you could see the division, the house divided, right? My 9-year-old came into the room and he looked at the screen and he said, "Is Joe Biden the vice president?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Which one is he, the mopey one or the happy one?" Divisions abound. And I was in the gym this same week. And I'm listening, as I always do, to the conversations around me. And I hear this guy turn to his friend and say, "Can you believe that president is hoping women get paid the same as men?" And I'm thinking, what century do we live in? How am I supposed to love that neighbor if I don't even like him? So why are we clapping? Because in the midst of all these divisions, we need unity. We need to feel as part of something bigger than ourselves. And when I was sitting in the temple at the Shabbat service, which was confusing and in 2 languages, and the songs were horrible, and I was feeling frustrated. At the end of the service, the Kanter stood up and said, "Let's clap for Shabbat." And I started to feel that unity that you just felt if you participated. I noticed some of you weren't. What we need is a new model for love thy neighbor. To get past the walls we build up around us, to find ways toward unity. And it starts with acknowledging what we can do. Now that all was a preamble to 3 weeks on love in worship, our favorite topic, and for good reason. Love is the center of all religion. And if it was at the center of how we lived, who we are, we would be more peaceful and more happy and more fulfilled. The complicated lenses that we wear, the bodies that we inhabit, the privileges we have or don't have, the expectations we have for ourselves and each other get in the way of our unity. For instance, Bell Hooks, a radical educator and writer, says, "Men theorize about love, but women are more often love's practitioners." She says this is so because men know the feeling of being loved, and women feel they are in constant state of yearning for it. I'm not sure she's right. She may be out of date with us sensitive males of the 21st century. But what she is right about is that who we are, where we are, what we do, and what we practice changes how we love. Changes how we relate to one another. The truth is that we are all capable of love and capable of receiving and giving it. No one's life story is without struggle to find out how love sways the path. I know this because you have sat in my office and told me so. I have seen you sit in this sanctuary to be held by us in times of heartbreak. You have known the abundant love of friends, and you have cried over a cup of coffee in the lonely morning. That is all of our experience. The human condition is to struggle in this category of life, to seek love, to seek unity, and to fail at it. The reality is that there is redemption if we have failed each other. Not given to us by a distant God. It is in loving more sincerely and making room for mutuality, for compassion, and seeking the wisdom to guide the heart that breathes in and out the miraculous day. It comes when we let time heal all things, when we take a step toward giving or receiving forgiveness, as was said in the prayer today. Redemption comes when we know that we are capable of love, that we are beloved. So what about loving thy neighbor who you don't even like? I want to propose this to you, that you don't have to love your neighbor. I know that's a relief to some of you. But you do have to treat them with dignity and respect. Sorry for those of you who thought you were off the hook. The more I think about the divisions we live with, the divisions of race and politics and class, the more I see that the most damaging part of all that human behavior is the tyranny of superiority and judgment. No tyranny or oppression ever happened between two perceived equals. It always happens when we create the mindset that you are different than me. I've been walking around all week thinking about my judgments of other people a lot in the gymnasium. They are abundant, my judgments. Maybe there's something evolutionary about doing that, about trying to measure ourselves against the other. If he or she can't give me what I need to survive, I create a dismissal of them. Maybe that's something deep within us. But we have evolved. And the religions of the world and our faith has challenged us around this issue. To go beyond the idea that if we can't gain from one another, we must see each other as part of one human family. The challenge is to our judgments and the barriers we create with one another. So I pose two questions to you now. What keeps you from loving your neighbor? And what can you do to create at least respect for that neighbor? Neighbor, loosely interpreted, could be the person who lives next to you, but more likely someone in your life or some group or some situation where you feel isolated, where you feel the barriers growing up around your soul? What keeps you from loving your neighbor, and what can you do to create at least respect for that neighbor? Now, that's not a rhetorical question, because I want you to try something right now. And in my mind, there's about 1,000 ways why this can't work. One is that it'll be too loud, or you won't hear each other, or you won't want to say it to one another. But what I want you to do is turn to someone near you and have about a 2-minute conversation about these questions. I want you to turn to them and just say, what keeps me from loving my neighbor? And what can I do to create at least respect for them? This is an experiment, and you can turn to someone you came with or someone you didn't. And you might be in pairs and you might be in threes. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. So go. You're living the sermon now. You are the live sermon. Thank you for that. Thank you for making the sermon come to life. Thank you for those conversations. I hope maybe you continue those conversations. What's the risk? I read a story recently that motivates me to consider this form of love we call Philia. It's a story about the prisoners at Robben Island in South Africa, the freedom fighters, which included Nelson Mandela and others, who in the prison were there for more than 20 years together. And this story was written by someone who was on a tour there. I think I may have told you something about this many years ago, but it came back into my mind. The visitor to Robben Island was on a tour, and the tour guide had been a prisoner in the prison. And they're standing in this long room, cold, concrete, bare room with no cots, no furniture, in which 15 or 20 freedom fighters of South Africa were present together, including the tour guide. And one of the people in the tour said, "How could you survive? Survive the brutality of that situation?" And he said, "What we did was teach each other ballroom dancing." Teaching each other ballroom dancing. When I think of these moments when our own greed and our own instinct to survive should cast us further from one another, but rather draws us closer, I think if they can, we can. If they can overcome division and the brutal walls, some literal and some imagined, then we can remove ourselves from all sorts of isolation. We can find ourselves, if not in love for each other, at least in respect. Of course, these freedom fighters weren't trying to teach the guards to dance. They knew that division would take decades to cross. But they didn't give up on the goodness they could find in one another, or the notion that each were equals in the struggle to make sense of the world. The dehumanizing narratives that say, "I am better than you," or "I have the answers and you don't," or "I have and you shouldn't," must end. And it begins with us. The poet said we cannot eliminate hunger, but we can feed each other. We cannot eliminate loneliness, but we can hold each other. We cannot eliminate pain, but we can live lives of compassion. Maybe we can. Maybe we can speak of the prisons we create, the barriers between us, the assumptions we make, the self-interest we garner, and in that find a brotherly and sisterly love. Something we already know so much about. Friends, that is Philia. In the words of our seminary in the West, we seek to embody just and loving human community in which people are free to be fully themselves, in which people engage one another in respectful, welcoming ways, and in which no one is rejected, silenced, or exploited. We seek to claim the possibilities that we all can meet one another in love, to keep faith with this desire. Requires us to recognize that we strive to love one another and to be just, even as our lives have been affected by violence, oppression, and injustice. It means deepening our capacity to be honest, direct, and present to one another. Let's do a little clapping. Everything we need or ask for is here in this flawed abundance. May we break down the walls that keep us from one another, and therein seek love and respect. Amen, brothers and sisters. Amen. Feel the unity.